All right, good morning. I want to welcome board members and guests to our Wednesday, June 26th meeting of the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency, the Placer County Airport Land Use Commission, Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency, and the Placer County Local Transportation Authority. Today, we will not require roll call votes for public comment. After I open an item for public comment, those joining us by Zoom webinar can signal they wish to speak by clicking the raise hand button located in the middle bottom of the Zoom webinar window. If you are joining over the phone, you can press *9. PCTPA staff will call out individuals one by one who have indicated that they wish to speak. If you experience technical difficulty and are unable to provide public comment during this meeting, please email your comment to solvisable@ssabol@pctpa.net. Thank you so much. And Supervisor Holmes, would you please lead us in the flag salute?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Wonderful, thank you. Solvi, could we get a roll call, please?
Andriana,
Here.
Broadway,
Here.
Cortez,
Here.
Holmes,
Here.
Howdeshelt,
Here.
Wilkins. We have a quorum.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Agenda review. Matt, are there any modifications necessary for today's agenda?
Chair, two quick points. One, there was an amended agenda indicating that there's no need for a teleconference location available today. That was posted within 72 hours required by Brown Act. And two, just be aware there was a typo in the agenda noting last month's meeting minutes were from May 26th. Obviously, they were the 22nd. The date on the minutes themselves correctly reflect the 22nd. Our apologies for that.
Wonderful, thank you, Matt. I appreciate it. And Matt, anything on AB 2449?
All are present, no action necessary on item D.
Wonderful. With that, we'll move to item E, which is approval of our minutes from the May, as noted, 22nd, 2024 meeting. Is there any changes necessary or noted? If there are none, could I get action on the minutes?
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the meetings from May 22nd. Any further discussion? There being none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed or abstentions? Passes unanimously. Thank you. Next item is public comment. This is an opportunity for members of the public to address the board on items not on our agenda today. Please limit any comments to 3 minutes. Do we have anyone in chambers who wishes to speak on an item not on our agenda today? There being no one in chambers, do we have anyone online that wishes to speak? No. Wonderful. Thank you. We will now move to our consent calendar for the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency. These items are expected to be routine and non-controversial and will be acted upon by one action of the board without discussion. Is there anyone from the board that wishes to pull an item from today's consent calendar?
Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Do we have anyone from the public that wishes to pull an item? No one in chambers, anyone online? No. Could I get action?
PCTPA consent calendar. Second.
Like that speed, keeping Placer moving.
I got it.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? There being none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed or abstentions? Passes unanimously. Next item is item H, our consent calendar for the Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency. There is one item today. Does anyone wish to pull from the board, wish to pull that item? Does anyone in the public in chambers wish to pull the item? And do we have anyone online? If not, could I get an action, please?
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent calendar. Any further discussion? There being none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed or abstentions? Passes unanimously. Thank you. Our next item is item I, the Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Service Agency fiscal year 2024-25 budget adoption. And I believe Mr. Costa is going to present that today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, members of the board and public.
This item has pretty detailed information in the staff report, so I'm just going to provide a high-level overview of the budget proposed for fiscal year 24-25 for the CTSA. For our operating revenues are actually decreased by approximately 11%, and a large part of that is due to a reduced amount of carryover that we are bringing over into the next fiscal year from this fiscal year. You will see actually that our LTF, or local transportation funds, and state transit assistance funds, those two large sources, are increased in funding. That's because the CTSA is actually claiming up to its 4.5% allocation that it normally claims in every given fiscal year, except for last, where it was trying to draw down reserves. And so that's why you see such an increase in the LTF and STA. In terms of the carryover, that is carryover that we anticipate from this fiscal year into next year. And that is consistent with previous years, aside from last, where we had a larger than normal carryover. For our CTSA operating administrative budget, that budget is increasing approximately 6% compared to this current fiscal year into next year. A large part of that is due to increased administrative costs, staff support costs that are allocated to CTSA for support efforts such as the comprehensive operational analysis and short-range transit planning efforts, as well as other administrative tasks. In terms of the outreach and marketing, that's another cost that's actually decreasing slightly because there was a heavy lift in this current fiscal year to bring online our one-stop resource website for the South Placer Transit Information Education Training Program, as well as bring the CTSA marketing plan that the board adopted back in January of 2023 to implement those efforts. And so you'll see the budget decreasing slightly because we've implemented a lot of those tasks already that were adopted by the board as part of the marketing effort. So there's a slight decrease, but we will continue to promote our South Placer Transit Operator Services as well as our CTSA programs into the next fiscal year. For our core programs, our Placer Rides programs and our South Placer Transit Information Center, which we also refer to as the call center, those increased slightly in this current upcoming fiscal year. They are consistent with our agreements with our core partners, Placer Rides being operated by our partners at Seniors First, and the South Placer Transit Information Center being operated by the city of Roseville and their contractors. We are currently programming funds as well for the remaining efforts associated with our comprehensive operational analysis and short-range transit plan in the next fiscal year. You will see a decrease because, again, a large majority of that work was done in this current fiscal year, and we will actually be bringing, or we anticipate bringing, a comprehensive operational analysis service plan to the board in September for your review before we kick off the short-range transit planning efforts in the fall. So that's where you see some of the reduction in costs. One of the big things I'd like to point out in the operating budget is the Transit Ambassador and Mobility Training Program, which are operated by the city of Roseville as a partner. Those programs are actually being proposed to be merged into one program known as the Transit Training and Education Program. And that program, the reason why there is a merger is we are looking at a consolidation of operations to save on some efficiencies with the way that the program performs, as well as we were having difficulties with actually maintaining the transit ambassadors post the pandemic. And so we will not see the transit ambassadors move forward in the next fiscal year. However, that education and outreach component associated with the transit ambassadors will now be handled by City of Roseville staff. So you will actually still see efforts. You will still see staff out in South Placer region educating members of the public about transit service options in the region. For Placer 211, this is something actually that was previously funded by the CTSA, not funded in the current fiscal year, but we are proposing to bring back funding in next fiscal year. And that is mainly due to a partnership with Placer County Health and Human Services, where we are working with them to integrate some of our existing transit resources, including the South Placer Transit Information Education Training Program and the website, into the Placer 211 program. So we're working with our partners at HHS to coordinate and, again, cross-promote public transit in 211, since we do know that there are some calls that 211 receives related to transit. And so we are looking at that partnership, and we're proposing some funding for their program in the next fiscal year. And then the last thing that I'd like to note on this slide is that the South Placer Transit project funding commitment, that is something that was committed actually 2 years ago, and it is carryover in this next proposed budget because the program has not started. That is also known as the Rapid Link Transit Service. And so we are anticipating to continue to carry over that support into the next fiscal year when we hope that Rapid Link will start in the spring of 2025, operated by the city of Roseville. We are proposing also continued funding for Sierra College, the Transit Pass Pilot Program, which is a 3-year pilot program. This will be year 3 of that pilot, and we are continuing to work with our transit operators and Sierra College partners on implementing that program. To date, we actually, as of, I would say, March of 2024, so this March, we've actually provided around 50,000 rides for Sierra College students free of charge under this program. And then the last project is actually a new project that we are programming in the CTSA's budget, which will be a complement to our comprehensive operational analysis and short-range transit planning efforts. And that's an assessment of our bus stops countywide, and that's to assess them for accessibility, as well as to assess them for potential improvements that could increase ridership demand on our transit service network here in the South Placer region for all of the operators. And that's something that we developed in partnership with our transit operators working group. So one thing I'd like to note too is we are maintaining a small reserve, approximately 7.3% in this proposed budget to carry over as a reserve basis. And this budget was developed in coordination with our transit operators working group, of which both transit operators and our member agencies have representation on. And our TOG did pass this budget in May, as well as our TAC concurred with the findings to propose this budget to the board at their June meeting. So with that, staff does recommend proposal of the fiscal year 24-25 budget, and I'm available for any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ryan. Does the board have any questions for Mr. Costa?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to get clarification on the Sierra College program. Does that 100, that reduction actually reflect the usage and a more accurate estimate of what we'll have to expend? Thank you very much.
That's correct.
All right, any other questions for Mike? All right. Do we have anyone in chambers in the public who wishes to comment on this item? Sylvie, do we have anyone online? If not, I'll bring it back to the board for action.
Mr. Chair, I'll be glad to give approval. I'll be glad to second it.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve this item. Any further discussion? There being none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed or abstentions? Passes unanimously. Next item is item J, the South Placer, South Sutter Fair Share Transportation Funding Analysis. Next steps, and David Melko is going to present that.
Good morning. David Melko, Senior Transportation Planner. So you've got today we're going to do a informational presentation on the release of a draft report titled South Placer, South Sutter Fair Share Transportation Funding Analysis. There's no action required at this point in time for the specific report. The report will be out for public review for a 45-day period, with the public review period completing at the end of July. There are 2 actions that we will be asking the board to take today, and one is to authorize the executive director to enter into a time extension with our funding reimbursement agreements with Placer County, Sutter County, and the city of Roseville, so that we can complete the analysis in October. And then along with that, there's a second action to enter into an on-call contract with DKS Associates to complete the work also by October. And with that, we do have a PowerPoint presentation that's 15 slides that summarizes what is a fairly, I'll say, dense report, and our technical report is probably a better way to put it. And with that, the presentation has some technical aspects to it, some math aspects to it. So apologies for that, but we tried to distill down over 100-page report to 15 slides. And as you can appreciate with fee programs, there is some complexity associated with that. And I would also encourage the board to save their questions until the end of the presentation. Presentation will be a 2-part. I'll do the beginning, I'll conclude. Erin Baca with DKS Associates is here to joining me, and she will do the bulk of the presentation. And with that, get started. Okay, so as a matter of background, why is PCTPA working on this fair share analysis? So we were asked by the participating agencies, Placer County, Sutter County, and Roseville, to facilitate this analysis. And to some degree, this analysis goes back to a mutual settlement agreement that was entered into between Placer and Sutter counties regarding two specific plans, Placer Vineyard and Sutter Point. And both counties, as part of that mutual settlement agreement, agreed to address interjurisdictional fair share responsibilities for specific plan related traffic. And then within that mutual settlement agreement, it also identified that there is the potential to create a joint powers agency, as well as a program of, or alternatively, a program of credits and reimbursements consistent with the fair share mitigation that was identified in those specific plan EIRs. And to a large extent, the analysis that we have in our report in the presentation today addresses that fair share analysis responsibility. And so the draft report identifies a number of specific roadway improvements necessitated by growth in this particular portion of the region, and we'll in subsequent slides talk about the level of growth that will be occurring over the next by 2040 and under cumulative conditions. And as I noted in my intro, the draft report has been released for comments and went out July 14th or June 14th, excuse me, and will go through the end of July. And then with that, we go to the next slide with Erin.
Thank you, David, and good morning to the board. What I'm going to try to do quickly this morning is give you an overview of the key inputs that were used in our study, and then kind of summarize the bottom line results. So this slide depicts the study area surrounded by the orange border, and that largely corresponds to the area modeled by the travel demand model used in the Sparta fee program as expanded to include portions of South Sutter County, including the Sutter Point specific plan area. Those districts shaded in green or aqua were the districts that were focused on for the analysis. So we did look at 4 different funding scenarios, and these are a combination of 2 different land use growth forecasts combined with 2 different capital improvement programs or project lists. So the first 2 scenarios use what we call the 2040 primary land use forecast. And this is just what it states, a 2040 horizon. And it does not represent build out conditions. Scenarios 3 and 4 use the so-called supercumulative forecast, which represents build out of all the approved specific plans, as well as for the city of Lincoln, their land use quantities from their 2050 horizon, from their general plan update. So combined with these, we have 2 key main variations of the capital program that is proposed to be funded by this South Placer, South Sutter, or SPSS funding program that was analyzed. So the first option does include the Placer Parkway, along with interchanges along the parkway and with State Route 99. The second option, and I will mention, the second option does not include Placer Parkway, but does assume improvement of Sandkey Road in Sutter County with the build out of the Sutter Point specific plan. The Riego baseline road corridor also varies between these scenarios. With the 2040 land use growth scenario, the cross section assumed to be 4 lanes. And with the supercumulative, it's assumed to be a 6-lane cross section. Next, we want to consider the amount of growth that has been planned for in South Placer and South Sutter counties. And this is just a graphic depiction. So the study area is anticipated to add either 80,000 under the 2040 scenario or about 130,000 dwelling units under the supercumulative scenarios, which is, as you can imagine, a significant amount of growth. And this table shows the same information converted to dwelling unit equivalents, which we like to work with for our funding calculations. And basically that translates all the different types of land use, residential and non-residential, into a common unit, where each dwelling unit equivalent has the travel demand of a single family housing unit. So here we see under the 2040 scenario, there's a total of 95,000 roughly dwelling unit equivalents added to those districts that we have focused on for the funding analysis. And under the supercumulative scenario, it's over 150,000 dwelling unit equivalents. So again, these are quite significant quantities, somewhat akin to adding a whole new smaller city within the region. The next major input has to do with the capital projects that would be funded by the SPSS program. And so you can see how those extend throughout the region here, the main ones being the Riego Baseline Road improvements throughout the study corridor, as well as Placer Parkway. There are also proposed improvements on State Route 99, the addition of some kind of high occupancy lane between Alberta Road and either Placer Parkway or Sand Key Road. And several north-south additional roadways, 16th Street, Watt Avenue, and Santucci Boulevard. In addition, again, would propose to collect some funding towards State Route 99 interchanges with Riego Road and either the Parkway or Sand Key Road, and then along the Parkway itself. You'll note the different colors. These depict how we segmented some of the projects to analyze them for fair share traffic calculations. So what will it cost to construct all of these improvements? Well, there's also an impressive price tag here with Placer Parkway over 1.3 billion. You'll see some other additional columns here. So one of the steps in the analysis, we do have to take into account the fact that there are existing deficiencies, in particular along Baseline Road. And by that, I mean operational deficiencies, too much volume for too little capacity. So this is just a step we take because we cannot ask new development to pay to remedy that, the existing deficiencies. And so before going in further steps of the funding calculations, we adjust for those. And those percentages are for the program as a whole. But we did adjust it at the specific project segment level. And so on the far right column, you see the amounts that were carried forward into the funding calculations. So one really important aspect of our study was to account for the number of existing traffic impact fee programs that exist in Placer County jurisdictions. And so these are depicted here on this map. They do include the city county fee program, the Dry Creek Benefit District in the Placer County unincorporated areas, Highway 99 Riego Road interchange fee, and probably most significantly, the Sparta Tier 2 development agreement fees. So one very important step is we wanted to account for this revenue that is planned to be collected through these programs. The projects funded by these programs do overlap to a large extent, but not completely, with the proposed SPSS project list. So at a very high level, this is how the funding need per dwelling unit equivalent for the different fee districts was calculated. So first, we conducted a fair share traffic analysis that involved a level of detail of 22 geographic districts and 23 transportation capital project segments. This was used to derive cost allocation factors, which allocate project cost based on the amount of growth associated traffic that was used by each project segment. So once the capital costs are, they've been, as I previously mentioned, adjusted for existing deficiencies, they are then allocated among 14 different geographic districts. The third step would be then to look at the amount of funding that is anticipated to be collected for those projects by the existing overlapping fee programs. And then finally, any remaining funding need would be divided by the anticipated number of growth units, dwelling unit equivalents, to arrive at the net SPSS program funding requirements in each district and development area. So this table shows the figures we arrived at. Again, I want to remind you the key inputs to these results would be for each district, which you see the numbers there on the left. The costs were really driven by the amount of growth traffic from that area using each project segment. So not total traffic, not traffic associated with existing development, but traffic associated with planned and approved growth. Then again, as I previously mentioned, the gross funding need per unit is divided by the expected level of growth. And then it is offset by revenue anticipated to be collected through existing programs. So as you can see on the far right, the districts, most of the districts within Placer County jurisdictions do already collect traffic fees. And those have been summarized in the far right column there, with the result that under many scenarios, there would be no additional funding need for several of the districts. In contrast, Sutter Point does not currently have any kind of transportation or traffic impact fee in place. And the other thing to keep in mind about Sutter Point is that the traffic associated with that area is almost entirely growth traffic. So this is an important analysis we wanted to present because it will kind of support recommendations for going forward. So what's shown here in the tables is a comparison. In the top table, for example, the Sutter County, meaning Sutter Point specific plan area, cost responsibility for projects segments that would be built in Placer County as compared to the reverse. In other words, Placer County costs responsibility for projects that would be built in Sutter County. And so this shows the net. So you look at the top row for scenario one, that would be about $10 million difference. So that's what that column means. The top table does correspond to the agreement that was negotiated, and it compares only unincorporated areas of Placer County with Sutter. And as you can see, you know, these net funding responsibilities turn out to be a very small percentage of the total program cost, meaning the cost of all the improvements that are needed. And that is probably well within the margin of error for the planning level cost estimates that are being used at this point. The bottom table shows similar information, except this time we are also looking at City of Roseville, Lincoln, and Rockland. And so in this case, the sort of net funding responsibility flips, and then the column is listing the Placer County net fair share for projects built in Sutter County. And again, this accounts for a relatively small percentage of the overall program costs. So we thought it's important to present this because it does underlie, it would support the notion that maybe Sutter County, if they adopt a fee program that's consistent with this analysis, that would, satisfy a fair share contribution for regional projects. And I'm going to turn it back over to David to talk about some recommendations and next steps.
Okay, so in terms of conclusions, I think the one significant conclusion is that with the existing fees and development agreements within Placer County, which includes Placer County, Roseville, the other jurisdictions. They largely fund Placer's fair share of regional improvement study. So, and the net cross-county line differential, whether you're looking at Sutter impacts on Placer County as defined under the mutual settlement agreement, or Placer County, including the cities within the South Placer region and their impacts on Sutter County. So the net differential is considered to be small and within the margin of error. So the project development team, which includes Sutter County, which includes Placer County, which includes the city of Roseville, and as well as us facilitating this analysis, is recommending that Sutter County basically take this report and use it as a basis to adopt and implement the fee program for Sutter Point Regional Transportation Projects in lieu of creating a multi-agency joint powers authority. The conclusion on the project development team was that going through and developing a JPA would be a much more time-consuming process as compared to, since we already have existing fee programs that overlap with a significant number of the regional transportation projects that we portrayed. It would be just make more sense, I suppose, to speak, for Sutter County to go forward and to implement the responsibilities that are identified in the mutual settlement agreement for them, as well as within their specific plan EIR. And so with that, that's our recommendation at this point in time. And once the report is concluded in October, Sutter County has indicated that they would, take that recommendation forward to their board and start working on a specific plan fee analysis for Sutter Point. And then at that point, since Sutter and Placer counties entered into a mutual settlement agreement back in 2009, the recommendation is that there will probably be a need to update that settlement agreement based upon the fee program that is adopted and put in place by Sutter County, and then a procedure in terms of how you go forward and implement future projects. And then lastly, as I noted in the beginning, this is a draft report. So there's going to be stakeholder comment. And we have, as part of stakeholder outreach, at least within May and June, we've met with the elected officials that represent these districts within Sutter, Placer, and Roseville. We have a strategy team that includes developers for the specific plans in this area, and we've met with them. And as you can expect, there's a lot of
Unhappiness.
angst. Yeah, it probably is a good way to put it, about a recommended program. And so we'll get their feedback, and much of it will be technical. And then, of course, some of it will be legal and some of it will be probably political. And we've also met with the Building Industry Association. And the Building Industry Association, the group that we met with, represented Placer County developers and builders. And as you can imagine from a meeting like that, I think the bottom line was that the developers within Placer County already felt that we've already given. And so we're not really in the mood to give more. And they do recognize that Sutter County needs to put together a fee program of some type to deal with regional transportation projects. And so with that, we'll get comments, and then at the end of October, at the end of July, and then we'll get back together with the project development team and with DKS Associates, and we'll, refine the report as needed, and we'll identify next steps. When we met with Supervisor Landon, she had a very good suggestion about putting together a schedule for the next step process. So we'll work on that, and we'll be back to this board, hopefully in October. And with that, we will be basically asking you to accept the report as complete, and most probably also accept the recommendations to move forward. And at that point, it basically moves into Sutter County's court in terms of, going forward and implementing. And there will be obviously continued input by Roseville and Placer County on the progress of the development of a fee program in Sutter County. And with that, we're glad to take any questions.
So if I could just really quickly, because there was a lot in that. So really what we're asking for today is, and you've seen it, right? There was 22 separate geographic areas, 23 components of project, times 4 scenarios, a lot of math, which they went over. And at the end of all of that math, the cross-border impacts was 1 to 4% from Sutter to Placer and 1 to 8% from Placer to Sutter, which is driving towards this recommendation is they've, the presentation's already stated that it would be silly to have this, it seems silly to have this big cross-functional JPA. The action before you today is just to authorize me to extend the contract. So we're at a draft report right now. No one's asking for any action relative to the report, but just to give me the authority to do the extension so we can wrap this up, just to bring back what's actually before you today. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, any questions from the board? Yes, sir.
Yeah, just a couple from David. So given that the cross jurisdictional impacts are more or less offset, the benefit of that is that if, there's development in Placer County, and if Sutter County accepts the results of that report, they're less likely to litigate over regional transportation impacts on development in Placer County, and then vice versa in Sutter County. I would suspect. Do you have any kind of read, or maybe that's a question for some of the folks that sit up on this dais in terms of what those relationships would look like going forward, in terms of whether you think we'll end up at that point? So let's say Sutter County chose not to adopt a traffic impact fee program. They would have an issue in terms of regional impact or regional transportation issues in Sutter County that they would not be dealing with. What's your speculation on how this plays out politically if Sutter County just chooses not to?
Let me try to answer. I mean, as David said at the beginning, there's a settlement agreement. That settlement agreement would get reopened immediately. And in a bit of irony, the Placer Vineyards folks are not some of the landowners in there are some of the same landowners in Sutter Point. So, or let's say the larger landowners in Placer Vineyards are the same landowners in Sutter Point. It was 20 years ago on July 3rd that I went to work for Lennar, and we put a ballot measure on to change that commercial industrial zoning to provide some residential. So overnight success, 20 years in the making. They're now in the ground with some pipe work, and so, but to answer your question, it would reopen the settlement agreement. So
This settlement agreement basically that we wouldn't sue each other until this got figured out.
my understanding is it committed folks to funding their fair share.
Okay.
So
Correct. As part of, the next steps through October here, one of the recommendations with the project development team is for us to reconvene what we have used in the past in this study effort as a 2x2x2. And so we're looking to do that in September, where we get the specific elected officials within Sutter County, Roseville, and Placer County to meet and to kind of talk through, the results of the report. And it's probably the best to do this in person so that we can, work it. And that will probably provide a good litmus test in terms of where we're at. And probably will help form, the final recommendations that go into a report that we bring back to this board in October. So I think that will be a good, point in terms of knowing where we're at.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
no,
Any questions? No. So this is not a requirement of PCTPA. We volunteered to facilitate this, this process.
That's correct. Correct.
Okay, so subject to this moving forward? It sounds as though there may be some dissatisfaction from some parties relative to the recommendations. We're spending staff time, resources, managing this when we could be spending time elsewhere. So when do we move beyond? Is it when the presentation is made relative to the final report? I mean, at what point do we as PCTPA, given this is not a PCTPA requirement, when do we free our staff up from work on this and move
Yep.
to allowing Sutter, Roseville and Placer to work through whatever concerns they have in moving forward?
Right. And one point here is we are being compensated, staff's being compensated, billed to, and are being compensated for their time. And it would wind down in October with the completion of this report, right? We're in a draft report right now. We have all of the funding and budget to get to a final. We just need to do this extension. We would then transmit that report. And again, it is a non-binding document, right? It is our recommendation based on the facilitated work that we've done on behalf of Sutter County, Placer County, and the city of Roseville. And then it would move over to Sutter, as David said. And then anything Sutter would be willing to do, that would be on the Sutter front. And this milestone event that David's mentioned would be this 2x2x2, where the electeds could get together as part of the transmittal of this information, and then to help Sutter kick off what they're independently going to do inside of their own geographic boundaries.
Okay, great. And thank you, Matt, for that additional piece relative to how it was paid for, because that was my second question, was just clarifying exactly that process and that it is paid for. It's not something PCTPA is taking an expense on for. We are reimbursed for the cost associated. So, okay, perfect. Well, thank you. Any other questions? All right, with that, is there anyone from the public that wishes to comment on this item that's here in chambers? Do we have anyone online? Okay.
Vasily, please give me the authorization to let this panelist person speak. Michael Garabedian, you're free to speak.
Thank you. Good morning. Mike Garabedian, Placer County, tomorrow with some questions. So there's what is the due date on the documents, and is everything in the agenda packet that is to be commented on by that deadline? And if not, how to get access to that? And about Sutter County's responsibility if this moves forward or at some point. Well, for instance, Sutter Point is, I think, entirely on the west side of 99. I think that's one question about how that is relevant. I think it's basically right next to 99. So they, I guess does this mean they'd be paying for Placer Parkway that's in Sutter County? Is that the idea? Maybe there could be some explanation of how it is that how Sutter County's share of Placer Parkway is estimated. And so those are my several general questions. And I'd be happy to follow up with staff if I can't sort out the answers, but perhaps it could be, those could be addressed. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Garabedian. Do we have anyone else from the public who wishes to comment? No? Okay, we'll bring it back to staff then. David, do you think you have those three questions? I
Yeah.
think there are two questions, and then there was a comment about the location, which I think there's a misunderstanding of where
Right.
that's located, so.
Okay, so the staff report, page 2 of the staff report, final paragraph has a link that identifies where you can download the report off of our website. So go ahead, download the report. It also identifies my name, phone number, and email, so you can reach out and contact me with any questions. And we have until the end of July for comments, and the comments will be submitted to me. Okay, so that takes care of that. Sutter Point, the majority of Sutter Point is on the east side of 99, north of Riego Road, and south of Sankey Road, and almost goes to the Placer County line. There's a little bit of an area that is not within Sutter Point. And then there is a portion of commercial industrial area around Riego, Highway 99 interchange on the east side, but the most significant portion of the specific plan area is east of Highway 99. And the report does provide maps of these specific plans. So you can see the location better in the report. In terms of Placer Parkway and its share, so Sutter Point environmental document identifies Placer Parkway as a mitigation measure. Mutual settlement agreement identifies Placer Parkway as a regional transportation project that both Placer County and Sutter County are responsible for fair share mitigation. This report goes through and identifies Sutter County's fair share responsibilities, cost share, under a with and without scenario. And on the without scenario, with Placer Parkway not being in Sutter County, Sankey Road is improved to a 4-lane arterial consistent with the specific plan. So there would be a connection. It would just be a different form of roadway. And it's also done under 2 growth scenarios, 2040 and super cumulative. So you get different costs and, ultimately different fees per dwelling unit, depending upon the growth scenario and capital scenario. So all that's laid out in the report. The report goes through that in pretty good detail. And with that, I think that summarizes response to his comments, and I'd be glad to answer any other questions.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, David. And yeah, I did note, and I basically clicked on the link and it will take you directly to that report. So
That's good. That shows that everything works.
yes, sir. So thank you for that. And I always
Always an accomplishment, right?
I always encourage the public, if your questions aren't addressed, to reach out for staff. They're always happy to work with you on additional questions or further answering those if they're not answered. So thank you for that.
And I was remiss, but I did not recognize in the audience, Rich Moorhead with Placer County and Jason Tchaikovsky, the city of Roseville. Those two have been with us as part of the project development team right from the beginning. And of course, are valuable resources in this effort.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, with that, I will bring it back to the board for further discussion or a decision.
I would authorize for the time extension to recommend, I move that we accept the recommended actions to authorize the time extension, the existing agreements, and authorize the letter of, what's LOTA? With the letter on, task agreement with DKS to complete the study.
I second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? There being none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed or abstentions? There being none, passes unanimously. Next item on our agenda today is the Placer County Freeway Service Patrol, or FSP, change orders. And I believe Solvi is going to present that.
Playing some musical chairs around here. All right, today.
Want me to go down there and man the?
Today, we're asking the board to authorize the executive director to issue time extensions to existing funding agreement. Oh, that's not me. Sorry. My apologies. Where am I at? All right, here we go. Today, we're asking the board to authorize the executive director to issue 2 change orders for Freeway Service Patrol for contractor services agreement for calendar year 2025. But before we get into that action, I thought we would just sort of briefly go over FSP because we haven't visited that in a while. So FSP, first and foremost, it is a partnership. It's a partnership between the California Highway Patrol, Caltrans, and Placer County Transportation Planning Agency. We have 2 tow trucks here in Placer County and 1 service truck. And their main jobs out there during peak commute hours are to basically get cars up and off the road and out of the lanes. And the way they do that, they'll change a flat tire. They tow inoperable vehicles to a designated safe zone. They do quick fixes like providing a gallon of gas, getting those folks off to another gas station, and jump starting a vehicle, and of course, removing debris from traffic lanes. And by providing these services, keeps our lanes clear, it provides congestion relief, it provides a safety aspect for sure, and air quality benefits to our motorists here in Placer County. All right, how are we funded? So 75% of FSP is funded through state funding. With all good state funding, there's a local obligation. So we have a 25% coming from a local match, and PCTPA allocated STBG funds in that last round of funding. And so this funding is provided through federal fiscal year 2026-27. And SACOG is, just side note, SACOG is going to be administering future funding cycles for CMAQ and STBG during their 6-county funding process. So that's the next round. Okay, this is just a snapshot of our FSP. We have FSP on I-80 between the Sac County line at Riverside and on 65, and that's called Beat 281. And then we have it on 65 from I-80 to 12 Bridges, and that's 265. And each beat is served by one tow truck, and we also have a service truck out there during the evening hours. Our service hours are Monday through Friday, 6:30 to 10:30 a.m. and 2:30 to 6:30 p.m. Service providers, we've got 2 service providers, Extreme Towing. They actually provided service for both the beats and the service truck through an agreement signed in September 2020. We had some pandemic issues. They had some staffing issues, so they could no longer provide service on 65 effective November 1, 2022. We brought in our backup, which was Sierra Hart. They proposed, they were our number 2, and so they took on 65. Contracts for both these providers are through December 2024, and they each again have 2 one-year options to extend. So assists, over the last 12 months, we've had about 2,800 assists. 265 has a few more there. And for those assists, basically are those incidents that FSP responds to. And while these are individual incidents that FSP is responding to, there has to be recognition in knowing that, for instance, each minute a stalled vehicle is in a lane, it can take 4 minutes of traffic to return to its normal flow. Okay, so here's what's in our change orders. For Extreme, it exercises a 1-year option to renew through December 25. It increases our hourly rate of the tow truck from $105.74 to $122. It increases our hourly rate of service from $85.11 to $89. And their not to exceed remains unchanged at just over $504,000. Sierra Hart, it exercises their 1-year option to renew through December 25, increases their hourly rate of the tow truck from $105 to $115, and their not to exceed is increased from $220 to $240. And the reasoning for the increases are statewide. It's minimum wages have increased. There's better wages elsewhere in other industries. Insurance costs have increased, and basically tow truck costs, parts and labor, which I'm sure we can all relate to, have all increased. So with that, happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Any questions from the board?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Just a comment. I think they probably have trouble finding tow truck drivers because of the drug background and check. And so that's a problem. That's probably why the
That's exactly it. They're a much higher, have a high standard because they're out there for us, they're out there on behalf of CHP and Caltrans, but they do have a high standard.
Yeah, my only comment is great report.
So Sylvie, any other questions?
I have one question. Okay, so in the staff report, it says that Extreme Towing notified that they could no longer provide service, but then there's still, did they come back? Okay. Oh, gotcha. So they're
I'm
just,
sorry.
that's okay. Okay, so they're just doing one B. Okay, gotcha. I was just reading through trying to,
Oh,
thank you. Yeah,
you
this is
bet.
great. Awesome. I didn't even know we had this.
Oh,
I did not know we had this.
oh, I'm so glad that
Yeah,
I
this is
went through
great.
the exercise there.
I just have one quick comment as far as, I've dealt with Sierra Heart. They actually used to, hold, I think they still might be contract for my real job and my real life. But that's a great company and they very friendly faces and they've always done a really good job.
Oh,
I think the brothers own it and they're pretty fantastic. So
awesome.
glad to know that you guys are using them.
Right, so Sylvie, just two quick questions.
Yes.
First of all, so the STBG funding's available for 3 more years. Have we thought about, I mean, those 3 years will come quickly. The potential other sources when we get to the point where STBG is no longer available?
Yes, I mean, we certainly can go through SACOG's 6-county funding process.
Okay.
So that's definitely something that hopefully we can work with them on, and they certainly support FSP. And so
I believe the updated memorandum of understanding between SACOG and PCTPA identifies the FSP program as a priority program for funding under surface transportation block grant funds. So and that program has been around for a number of years. It's changed its name, but it's been always an extremely popular program with local government and regional agencies. And, never one to predict what Congress will do in the future, but it's a program has always been there, and it broadly has broad eligibility. And so I think we're okay beyond 2027.
I just want to ensure that we're thinking through that process on both the other opportunities for funding, but also if we need to engage from our congressional perspective, ensuring we're having those conversations so that this type of funding is top of mind. So, okay. And then the second is in relationship to the tracking of service. I remember specifically the conversations about not having service on 65 because of the
Right.
challenges they were experiencing and the decisions, because it did increase our costs when we had to make that change and put that out to bid. And how are we measuring the service levels that are being provided? Are we able to track when calls come in, how quickly they're responded to, if calls aren't
Yes.
able to be responded to?
yes, we do have a tracking system through actually STA runs that. So EDCTC and us in Sacramento, and I think a couple other agencies, they feed into that. So every time there's an assist, that tow truck driver puts in all of what he did, how many minutes he spent there. And you can, so we track that way. And then that information is given to Caltrans and they put it in a report. And that's how it's tracked.
Do we know offhand approximately what the response time, you mentioned the 1 minute and it's carryover into traffic delays. Do we know approximately what the average response time is when a call comes in?
I think it's about 15 minutes.
Okay. So
I mean, I can definitely come up with an exact
if at
number,
some
but I'm
point
pretty
you've had
sure,
that
yeah.
opportunity, great. This program is fantastic. It's something that creates safety for those who are driving on both the interstate and on the state highway. It's creates safety for our highway patrol officers because it keeps them from having to pull over. The number of times that you see accidents occurring when vehicles are stopped on the side of the road, whether that be with or without emergency vehicles or service vehicles, is alarming. So being able to get someone out and to address that, and then the overall impacts on traffic. We already are dealing with traffic, and we want to do what we can to minimize it. Let's not add to it by not having the ability to get those vehicles off the side of the roadway. Don't know what it is about that. It's kind of like a dog and a squirrel. The broken down vehicle on the side or stopped vehicle on the side of the road tends to attract every driver driving by. So,
Yeah.
okay, great. Thank you, Sylvia. I appreciate that. Any other questions from the board? All right. Do we have any questions from the public on this item? I do not see anyone in chambers. Sylvie, sorry, I have to have you jumping seats. Do we have anyone? No one online. Wonderful. I will therefore bring it back to the board for comments or a decision. All right,
I'll second.
we have a motion and a second to approve. Any further discussion? There being none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, abstentions, passes unanimously. Thank you. And thank you, Sylvie, for that presentation.
Mr. Chair, I have to step out for a CCJPA meeting.
Okay.
Are we gonna be okay as far as
Well,
quorum?
wait for Bruce to get back here.
Can we bring you back for action after the presentation?
I'm sorry.
We bring you back for action.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
on
I'll
the
be
presentation.
back.
Okay.
Betcha.
Okay,
Wouldn't miss it.
Okay.
Gotta keep an eye on you guys. Come on.
You just go and just let me know if you need it, I'll grab, or you can just grab. Okay, I can.
Deanne?
I've been summoned.
Yeah, we need to wait, can we wait?
Yeah,
for Bruce?
excuse me, our quorum is 5,
Okay.
so we need
need-
5 to conduct business
Okay,
and
so-
to hold things, so.
Until, wait until Bruce returns. I believe he just,
No, he's already here.
oh, is he already in the meeting? All right, well, how about if we do this as quick as possible?
Yeah, as quick as possible.
All right.
Corey's telling me he can do this in 3 minutes.
3 minutes. All right, wonderful. Our next item will be presented by Corey. So which is item L.
Great. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members of the board. I will be very brief so that we can have our board member join CCJPA. This item is regarding the adoption of our 2044 interim RTP. Just kind of as some background refresher, we did present about this back in April. We're required to adopt the RTP every 5 years. Right now, our current adoption schedule for the 2050 RTP, which is being developed concurrently, is at the end of 2025. This is because of a schedule delay that SACOG requested from the state and the federal government that they were granted. We develop our RTP in tandem with them, so we also had to extend our schedule as well. Caltrans advised us in the interim to adopt basically a holdover RTP or an interim RTP until we can adopt our final one at the end of 2025, because our current official deadline is the end of this year. What is included in this RTP is essentially carrying forward the same programs, projects, and policies that were in the previous currently adopted 2040 RTP. We made very little adjustments to the document with the exception of deleting off completed projects and making minor adjustments to cost and schedule and description for each project. We did host a public comment period as required by state law for 45 days from April 15th to the end of May. We received 2 comments on the document. We made the document available to the public on our website and in person at our offices and libraries across the county. We also sent out notices via email and snail mail to over 100 different entities to give the opportunity to comment on this plan. All comments have been reviewed and addressed in the document. One thing I did want to note on the environmental review aspect is that we didn't make any substantive changes to the document, so we were relying on the previously adopted EIR from the 2040 RTP. And so there will be a finding in staff's recommendation to this board to essentially find that the RTP is consistent with the previous EIR. With that, staff's recommendation is threefold. We are asking you to adopt the 2044 RTP and then make a finding that the 2044 RTP relies on the findings, carries forward the mitigation measures from the 2040 RTP's certified EIR, and then authorize the executive director to file an NOD with the state clearinghouse and the Placer County clerk. Happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you, Corey. Any questions from the board? No. No questions from the board. Do we have anyone in chambers who wishes to comment on this item? And do we have anyone online?
No.
We do not. All right, I will bring it back to the board for discussion or action.
Move approval.
Okay.
Second, nice picture on the slide though, too. That's
Got it.
Awesome.
I know where that's from. All right, well, thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? There being none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed or abstentions? Passes unanimously.
Now I can go.
Supervisor Holmes, thank you for staying with us. None,
That train.
no other items on our agenda today. They're all updates require action, so we can therefore move to 5-person. Deanne, thank you very much for stepping in. We appreciate it. All right. So the next item on our agenda is the countywide zero emissions vehicle infrastructure plan update, and I believe David is going to present that.
Okay. Moving from fee programs to zero emission vehicles for me. Okay, so the good news is we were awarded a grant by SACOG. But as part of some background here, what is the carbon reduction program? So it's a program that was identified in the Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law. And as the name says, carbon reduction program, it's a program to basically reduce transportation-related carbon emissions. And so SACOG, as the Metropolitan Planning Organization, approved a carbon reduction program strategy because the money flows from the feds to the state flows it to the Metropolitan Planning Organizations. And the strategy that SACOG approved back in June identified three areas of emphasis, and one was the regional trail network implementation. Another was the zero emission vehicle or ZEV deployment, and then a strategic carbon reduction program. And then in October, SACOG approved guidelines for the program. The program is a 6-county, 2-year funding program totaling about $7.4 million. And several of you, and many others we've met with between November and January. And we did a number of meetings with all of our member agencies, with Liberty Utilities, PG&E, Pioneer Community Electric, Roseville Electric, the Air Pollution Control District, and of course, we met with SACOG staff. And during that period, SACOG issued a call for projects. And so all those meetings resulted in a discussion of a proposed scope of work for a countywide zero emission vehicle infrastructure plan. And we went to our technical advisory committee. They concurred with the approach. The program requires a match, and the match will be administered through the local transportation fund process. So when you have claims that come before your respective councils amongst streets and roads and transit claims as part of that LTF, there will be a line item for a match towards for the zero emission vehicle program. And so we applied for 1.2 million. We had support letters from everybody, which was really good because we wanted to emphasize a countywide approach, and SACOG awarded us the grant in June. And I think it was just a couple of days ago. So this is a little bit of it, probably difficult to view graphic, my apologies, but the zero emission vehicle work will include 8 tasks. And so there's a transportation planning task because we need to look at the demand and the location of, traffic, because traffic is our automobiles, and over the future, so many of those automobiles will be zero emission vehicle. And so we need to locate where they are traveling, because then if you want to place infrastructure for those zero emission vehicles, you need to go through and do some transportation planning and modeling. Think of gas station planning. So this is just, instead of gas station planning, it's zero emission vehicle planning and locating those. There will be a task associated working with the energy utilities, because we need to be able to identify where demand exists currently, because you want to locate charging infrastructure where there's available demand. But you also need to work with the utilities to be able to identify what their plans over a 10-year period, so that because the county's population is going to grow, the vehicle fleet's going to grow, and there are going to be more ZEVs. And so we want to be able to locate in the future infrastructure appropriately with the utilities planning. There is a public fleet component. Now, Roseville, Placer County, and I think Rockland are well ahead complying with the clean fleet rule as it applies to municipal fleets. I think Loomis, Colfax, Auburn are a little bit behind. So this task here is to assist all of our member agencies to be able to become compliant. Okay. Land use planning task. So as you probably are well aware as elected officials, there've been a lot of laws promulgated with respect to streamlining of permitting on zero emission vehicle infrastructure. And once again, our jurisdictions have varying levels of compliance with codes and with checklists. And so one of the tasks here will be to work with our jurisdictions to help bring everybody into compliance. Okay. And then in addition to that, there are some assembly bills out there, including on-street curb street charging. And so in anticipation that those bills may pass, we have tasks within this particular land use planning task that will assist the jurisdictions to comply with those bills. We have all this gets pulled together and in terms of an implementation program. It's a 20-year plan consistent with the MTP and with the RTP. And so as part of the implementation task, and because there's still a federal funding bill out till at least 2026, where these funds are available, as well as continued state funding, we want to make sure that we identify the opportunity for pilot projects. And then with that, be able to seek funding. And so that task there addresses that issue. And then there's an engagement task because with the federal funds and with the state funds, there's an emphasis in terms of reaching out to disadvantaged communities. And within that broad term, as you can appreciate with zero emission vehicle infrastructure, apartment complexes, multifamily development, because a lot of multifamily, is dated. And so there'll be a need to be able to figure out a way to be able to bring charging, to those developments so that they're not left behind in terms of the opportunity to be able to purchase a zero emission vehicle in the future. So that task addresses that. Engagement will include all of these stakeholders in terms of community groups, environmental groups, utilities, local agencies, public agencies. So it's a fairly significant task. And then all of this comes together into a draft plan, which would probably come together in December of next year, and with a final plan, hopefully by March, April of 2026. And as part of the grant requirements from SACOG, there is an adoption requirement. So this board would need to adopt this plan. And we would, as part of this task, also seek our member agencies as in terms of seeking their adoption, because it will help facilitate their sustainable strategies and in pursuit of federal or state funding for their respective jurisdictions. And this is just basically a simple table that shows that the match is 155,000, and it's basically follows the same formulas that we use for the local transportation funds. Everything is distributed by population. This table will be updated to reflect 2024 population estimates. And so these numbers here will be the numbers that you will see on claim forms that come before your respective bodies. Okay, so what's the next steps here? So we actually completed the MTIP program, so that's done. And I am right now finalizing the request for authorization. That is a term of art that you need to do to get federal funds. You got to submit it to Caltrans local assistance, who then eventually send it to FHWA and Caltrans headquarters, and they sign off on it. And then we will get what's called an E76, which Jody will then use to be able to then seek reimbursement for staff time and consultant time in the future. That's the process for the federal funding. And hopefully all that will be completed here in June. And we will, because that process, all this paperwork takes time, anticipate that we'll be able to obligate the federal funding in August. And at that point in time, we will release an RFP. We have not yet identified like a selection panel, but the selection panel will probably include representatives from our member agencies and hopefully maybe utilities. And we would be back before this board in October to award a consultant contract. And at that point in time, Jody will come back with an amended OWP, and that will be reflected in the amended OWP, you know, all of this work, including the grant. And Matt will issue a notice to proceed in November, and we will go forward and start the planning and complete the planning by March of 2026. And with that, I'd be glad to take any questions.
Okay, great. Any questions for David?
One or maybe two, David. So for the zero emission vehicle infrastructure planning that you would be assisting local agencies with, do you think that's going to be so for municipal fleets, the current CARB regulations are focused on heavy equipment,
Right.
and by and large, that equipment doesn't exist in zero emission vehicles right now. So it ends up being a bit of a it ends up being a bit of a regulation gamesmanship issue for some of the local agencies, quite frankly, currently, to be able to comply with the CARB regulations. So are you seeing some of that effort being to, you know, help advise some of the local agencies what some of the, I'll call it, the loopholes are in the CARB regulations that can help them stay in compliance while still being able to maintain their functionality for their municipal services?
I think that will be an important component of it. I mean, but the rules are in place.
Yes.
And so municipal fleets have turnover. They have life, you know, a truck has a life expectancy, you know, 10, 12, 15 years. So we'll be able to know what your replacement plans are. And at that point, you know, the rule will say, well, at this point, you have to have a zero emission vehicle. So you work backwards and you just put together a plan for that municipality in terms of how you would go about and where you would locate infrastructure, what type of infrastructure you need, what are the grant opportunities for you to be able to, you know, build that infrastructure.
Yeah. Okay. And I just bring it up because there's a lot of detail in those regulations.
Right. Yeah.
And then there's different ways that you can comply with the regulations. And
that's why we need consultant assistance.
yeah. But I know there's agencies that have gone out and bought, you know, 2 Ford Lightning pickup trucks because they're just over the weight limit to allow them to count as a heavy duty vehicle. And then that gets them into a percentage of their fleet being at a certain, of their heavy duty vehicle fleet meeting certain thresholds that then allows them to meet the CARB requirements for the next 4 and 5 years. And there's just things like that small agencies can do if they've got the right eye looking at this on their behalf in order to meet their compliance regulations that are otherwise very hard to meet.
Yeah, I'm totally supportive of that. I don't think we want to be a little mini CARB here. And you know, we want to be able to make sure that the local agency meets requirements. And so our job is to help.
So the idea would be to give them some strategies that may help them meet the state's requirements in ways that are not highly detrimental to their ability to actually do business.
Correct. Yeah. I don't see this, and of course I could always be countermanded, but I don't see this as an overhand regulatory approach on our part.
No.
Our part is to be assisting and make sure that you comply.
No, I would.
In the best way to comply.
Yeah, I never assumed we were trying to layer on more regulation. I think I applaud the portion of the work scope where we're trying to assist other local agencies in navigating the regulations with some consultant assistance, because there's different ways you can pull it off. So anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and then that topic. Second topic is, you think there's going to be anything related to hydrogen technology that's going to be a part of this conversation?
Well, so as part of our outreach, we started off with, it was an EV charging infrastructure, but the grant from SACOG focuses on zero emission. And so we don't want to exclude the hydrogen opportunity. I mean, hydrogen would probably be more appropriate for large
Yes.
fleets, class 7, class 8 trucks. You know, we've got an interstate in the corridor, so that may be an opportunity to look at. And so there is a corridor-based approach for freight in this, and so that's probably where hydrogen would see a focus.
Thanks.
Great. Any other questions?
Well, I just had a quick question earlier on when you were speaking, just because I like to be clear about language. So, you know, I understand what's being said. When you talk about zero emission infrastructure, you're basically just talking about charging stations, right? Or is there more to that?
Well, so a zero emission, so it could be a charging station for an electric vehicle.
Mhm.
It could be a hydrogen station. to
Gotcha.
Fuel a
Gotcha.
hydrogen fuel
Gotcha.
truck.
Okay, perfect, thanks.
So this is simply developing a plan.
Right.
This isn't coming up with solutions. So when do we start having the serious conversations? You know, yes, you plan the work, but then you have to work the plan. When we start looking at the actual infrastructure and how we're going to implement that infrastructure. You know, currently you have raised grants, which you have $1.8 billion in grant funding available on the raised grant side. And that can certainly be supportive. Now there's some limitations. But City of Roseville, for example, is a great location that would be able to receive that type of grant funding. But we're working on a plan, but where are we relative to actually implementing solutions that are going to provide for that? Because again, you have that, you also have the EPA. I think the EPA has what the clean trucks and the DERA and the different grants that are also available. And those are fairly sizable grant opportunities as well. Are we looking at that in order to plan forward? And you know, one of my concerns is we have as a state, we gave these electric vehicles the benefits, we highly discounted them, and then we gave them the ability to drive in the commute lanes, and yet they weren't contributing to the roads at all. And there was no thought about what do we do as we push more and more for this. Well, now in our municipalities, we're talking about this infrastructure. Well, when you look at the tax rolls for your communities, you look at your top 25, top 30 businesses, oftentimes it's your larger fueling stations. What happens when those fueling stations are no longer there? So are we incorporating with this the ability for the municipalities to see revenue streams as these type of solutions are being put into place? So is that part of our process, and are we looking
Yeah, I'll
to
take
that?
Chair, it's a good question, and I'll take that one. And just without getting too deep into this, I'll start by saying, you know, one of the things we talked about is what's the appropriate role of PCTPA in all of this. And we began from the perspective of what is sustainability. And we're going to, of course, continue to do everything we can to increase mode split, get people on transit, increase bike ped. But we recognize that because of our land use, we're still going to have a large share of people you know, commuting and moving about in the private automobile, right? So if that's where we're at, and because there are all of these opportunities, how do we sort of nudge the marketplace with regards to zero emission, largely expressed as, you know, electric in the light vehicle space, and then potentially hydrogen in the medium to heavy duty space, right? We also recognize that most people are going to handle this on their own. They're going to buy their electric vehicle and plug it in overnight. You know, and as the capital costs and the offerings of electric vehicles have come, you know, there's more offerings and the capital cost is coming down, more and more people are going to be able to afford that. And we don't believe it's the role of us as a government entity to get involved in that. The market's going to take care of that. We also recognize that Flying J and Pilot and Walmart and others are sort of in this business, and all of those people who currently have gas stations want to move into the next sort of version of that, and they have land and they have infrastructure. So it started with this: what's the problem? What is the size of this problem? So let's do the math to understand what's the size of this problem in Placer, and then what's the appropriate role of PCTPA as a governmental entity in solving for that problem. And that all that conversation sort of drilled down to the three large components of scope that you saw David outline and talk about. And so now where we are is we've successfully won this grant. We've got three distinct pieces of scope to handle the three sort of distinct areas of that problem that we want to tackle. And getting back to doing that work to then set us up for the next round of implementation grants. And you saw how there was a great deal of budget for engagement, because when you get involved with these private sector folks, let's say you wanted to, just as a case study, put in a charging station for medium and heavy duty trucks along the I-80 corridor. That private sector partner is going to want you to do certain things on their behalf because they're a private entity. They're not going to want to go talk to the businesses or the homeowners or things like that. They're not going to want to go seek the regulatory actions or right of way. They're going to expect PCTPA to do that work on their behalf in a public-private partnership. So this work is to set ourselves up to identify those things, get from 3 general scope areas to a list of projects that we can then identify and go after more state and federal dollars. So it is not just to sort of convene and have a nice glossy report at the end of the day, but we have to do that work because we're currently not, and most places across the US aren't, right? That's why this money has been slow to roll out of the feds, because a lot of these jurisdictions aren't ready to receive it or implement it because they haven't done this sort of work. So we're going to do this work quickly over the next 18 months to then put ourselves into position to, you know, implement charging stations in downtowns and put out, a truck fueling station / charging station along I-80 and things like that. So went a little long there, but just to give you an idea of this work is meant to be a component that will lead to actual implementation.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I get a little concerned as we start talking about 2026 and, you know, everything starts to extend further out, because then when you start talking 2026, then any type of implementation of solutions is probably another 2 years out. And now we're talking 2028. And so the quicker we can implement, the more benefit we're going to derive from it, and just that whole overarching scope of what are we looking at. And so this is just this is the planning process. This is looking at what are the potential solutions that are out there, what are the top opportunities that we have relative to those locations and where they would be, and how we work to pursue potentially these grant type opportunities, correct?
Yeah, one friendly amendment to that comment would be, much like Corey's managing our active transportation, the outcome of his countywide ATP is going to be a list of projects that are ready to go, agreed upon by member entities, and can go seek more funding. Similarly here, right? Where it's appropriate in certain scopes of the work is to actually say, okay, throughout this, so yes, it's planning work, but I would also call it pre-development work as well. It's getting into some of that initial pre-development so we can get projects ready to receive more funding.
Okay,
yeah,
great.
If I could add just 2 brief comments. So every task has within it a requirement of the consultant to look at the issues, constraints, and recommendations. So a recommendation may end up being a solution. It may recommend there needs to be some change to a regulation or a new law or whatever. It's hard to predict at this point because we're just starting, but there is within each task the ability to look at what sort of constraints there are, particularly on municipalities, since you're going to implement the infrastructure to a large degree, and what sort of recommendations need to be able to move forward. So that is in there. And then the scope also has flexibility within it that, if grant opportunity pops up and we've got a project that we've identified, and we're like 10 months into this, but we have a project that looks like it's a good opportunity for that grant. The scope has enough flexibility where we could then move forward, as part of a sidestep to pursue that grant with that particular project, and not necessarily have to wait, to the end of this planning effort to adopt a plan. So that was built into the scope because I recognize that the funding programs that are out there now, they have timelines, and the planning process that we do has its own timeline, and they don't always jive. So you need to have that flexibility built into it. And so we did that.
Great. Thank you for that, David. Appreciate it. All right. Any other questions? No. Okay. Does anyone from the public wish to comment on that? Public here in chambers? No? Anyone online? All right, wonderful. And that was just an update, so thank you for that update. Our next item is SB 125, which is also an update, and Mike, you're going to give that to us? Okay, wonderful.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning again, members of the board and public. As you may recall, this item was actually brought to the board's attention back in December of this past year. And what it came from was back in July of 2023, the state of California passed a budget trailer bill to their fiscal year 23-24 budget known as Senate Bill 125 or SB 125. That provided additional funding for transit operations and capital support for our region to the tune of $37.8 million. And that funding was then working with our partners and our member agencies that was distributed among many different projects, all capital focused projects, some going to the Capital Corridor for their phase 2 of Third Track project, and then additional funds going to a lot of our member jurisdictions for electric vehicle charging infrastructure and zero emission vehicle bus purchases, as well as some bus stop improvements. So that was all done back in December. The SB 124 program guidelines required our entity, PCTPA, to submit our list of projects to the California State Transit Agency, or Transportation Agency, or CalSTA, by the end of December, which we did, and allocating all of that $37.8 million to various projects that the board saw back in December. And then it was originally anticipated that we would get a check for that funding in April of this year. Well, as many of you know, the state budget is facing, of course, a significant deficit in the coming fiscal year. And as part of that mitigation for that deficit, as of the end of April, the state froze all funding that was anticipated for this program. What we're hearing at the staff level and working with different associations and working with our partners at the state level is that the funding hasn't gone away, but that most likely the funding will be, two things will happen. It will be stretched over multiple years. Originally, there was some 2- and 4-year cycles associated with the two different pots of money, which was the Transit, Intercity Rail and Capital Program funds, which was our very large pot of money, and then our ZETSIP funding, which was the zero emission transit capital funds. And so those were 4-year funds, and that was for electric infrastructure. What we're hearing is that the TIRCIP dollars will most likely be stretched from 2 to 4 years, or maybe even beyond. And the ZETSIP might also be stretched too, so that those funds won't come into our agency as quickly as we had anticipated. That's one thing that we're hearing. The other thing that we're also hearing as of right now is that the color of money, specifically for the TIRCIP dollars, which was originally state general funds, most likely will change over to greenhouse gas reduction funding or cap and trade dollars. So that's why, again, that program's being spread, because that funding does not come in right away. It usually comes in with the sale of cap and trade dollars. And so the credits have to accumulate in order for those funds to amass to what the program amount is. So that's kind of what we're hearing right now. We're keeping a very close ear to what's going on. Again, the thing that we're hearing is that the funding isn't going away, but that it most likely will be stretched, and that the color of the money may change. And so we're continuing to keep our partner member agencies updated on these changes that are occurring. Most likely we should hear more possibly after July, when the new fiscal year starts. There may be another trailer bill that gets adopted to either amend SB 125 or clarify what's happening with the new funding, but staff wanted to make the board aware of what was happening, considering the board did request in December any updates of significance in the next 6 months. So here today to answer any questions you may have, but I wanted to provide the board with this information.
Great, thank you, Mike. Any questions for
Nope.
Mike? No, not surprised, but
Yeah, not surprised.
okay, wonderful. Thank you for that update. Appreciate it. Does anyone in the public wish to comment on this item? Anyone online? Oh, all right, wonderful. Thanks again for the update. Next item we have is our executive director.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. So just wrapping us up here for today. This will be the last time, I guess, inside of the executive director's report that we talk about the sales tax measure. So just as a reminder, on the 11th of June, the Board of Supervisors did unanimously vote in a 4-0 vote to put the measure on the November ballot. We now have a measure. We are Measure B. There was a Measure A in the primary, so that's why we're not Measure A. So we're Measure B. Since then, we've had some busy couple of weeks presenting to the Joint Chambers of Commerce in Lincoln. I also presented to Sun City Lincoln with Mike and Sun City Roseville as well. So those were really good just to talk about our needs and get the message out. And then participated in a Hot Topics webinar with the North State BIA yesterday morning. As you are probably aware, with the adoption of our OWP for the next fiscal year, we no longer have a work element 61 next year, right? Because we're no longer funding any sort of regional funding education. So we as PCTPA will stand down as of June 30th. And of course, there will be a private sector campaign of some sort that will take this up starting the 1st of July. We will continue our general education and outreach as we do as part of our agency activities. But that's sort of where we're at. So it's really great news, and we'll be on the November ballot. In preparation for that, and just in general, recognizing that State Road 65 and the 8065 interchanges are our top regional roadway improvements, we thought it was a good time to get back with some of the new leadership at Caltrans District 3. And so Rick and I last week went up to Marysville and met with the new or the interim District 3 director and a bunch of his number twos to sort of talk about. Rick has been managing a State Road 65 phasing plan over the last year, and just to brief them on what we're thinking around State Road 65, how we see that breaking down into certain phases, what their appetite or capacity for alternative project delivery might be versus traditional design bid build. So we spent 90 minutes together to sort of get alignment between PCTPA and the district. I'd just like to report out, I thought it was an extremely successful meeting, and we plan on checking in with them probably every couple of months leading up until November. And so what we want to really do is just make sure we have a lot of alignment around what we think we need to do and what Caltrans thinks is possible on State Road 65 as well. We've already spent a good deal of time on the Carbon ZEV grant. I did just want to take an opportunity to, publicly thank David. David was in the terms that I like to use, he was our project champion on this. The entire agency got behind it, including our board members who are on, our SACOG board members as well, advocating for us. But, David was our project champion and our lead author. Corey was a co-author. Rick was involved, and really everybody was involved in getting that done. And I do want to publicly thank SACOG for their partnership. We had lots of questions. Christina Svensk, who's the director of transportation, made herself available, as did the person overseeing the procurement or the grant making, I should say, Victoria. So a big thank you to SACOG as well for their partnership in getting this. We're really excited. And as I sort of said off the cuff earlier, we believe this is the best path forward in an impactful way to have sustainability in a place like, Placer County, where we still have a lot of private auto trips. So just including with that. And then lastly, just as a remember, don't show up in July because no one will be here. So we will be dark in July. And so we hope everybody enjoys July, and we'll see everybody back here in August. Sure, that's the end of my report.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. Next item is board direction to staff. Any direction or requests from staff? No? All right. And in our packet, we had the informational items, including the CAC minutes and status reports. So with that, as was mentioned, we do not have a July meeting, so we'll look forward to coming together again August 28th. Because of that, I want to wish you all a safe and happy 4th of July. Enjoy your holiday, and we will see you in August. We are adjourned. Thanks.